Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Reference Point. I'm your host, Dave Cokerhook. And this evening, as you can see around me, is a whole bunch of plants. We're going to today be talking with Mr. Bruce Rogers, who we're going to talk about orchids. And he is affectionately referred to as the Orchid Whisperer, and we're going to learn a little bit more about that and find out a whole bunch about these fantastically beautiful plants and the history of them. So, Bruce, welcome to Reference Point.
Dave, thanks for having me here. This is great. I'm having a great time here. I want to bring you by a nice little selection of things we're going to be having at the show. Yeah. We have this big orchid show. It's up in San Francisco coming up at the end of this month.
I want to hear about that. But
Absolutely.
Before we get into that, I want to talk about some of the stuff that we have here, because orchids are, some of the samples you have here are absolutely beautiful. And there's so many different types of orchid here, which is always interesting to me. I've seen them, you know, we've had some in my house. My wife will pick them up when they're beautiful. They come in and they're there for a few days or a few weeks or a couple months, and then the petals fall off, and then they sit there and nothing happens again. So
well, isn't that wonderful? I know. It took us years to get that culture together so they don't ever bloom again. You just have to buy another one, and then buy another one, and buy another one.
But we're trying to figure out why. I'd like to talk about some of the types of things. I know there's different types of orchids, and I want to find out a little bit more about how we as regular folk here in the San Francisco Bay Area can have and keep them coming back and stuff like that. So tell us a little bit about the kinds of orchids.
I think I will. I'm going to grab this one right here to start off with, even though I had to reach a little bit. This is your basic Phalaenopsis. I'm sure this is what you have at home.
Basic what?
Phalaenopsis.
Phalaenopsis.
And there's a little cute joke that goes around, you can't fail with a fail. But people do fail with fails. And it's easy to do because they don't necessarily bloom back automatically. But here's a little trick right off the bat.
And are there different colors to?
Yes, you see here's one with white, with red, and then there's a pure white one. If you look closer on the door, there's one with the little yellow. They come in all different colors, and they all have the same little leaf like this, the leaves like this.
Okay.
And they're called monopodial in growth. In fact, the growth is only directed in one direction, so it's called monopodial growth. Now, with these, you can do an awful lot. Because I mentioned to you earlier that I worked for like Ralph Lauren Polo at one point. Well, if he wanted to, this was 25 years ago, and they wanted to get an orchid with a certain kind of bend in it. And you can take a wire and bend this stem and rewire it, and you could force it in any kind of angle you'd like to.
Okay.
So there's little tricks all about what you do with these little orchids. If these orchid flowers are starting to die, like at your house, and you're getting down to the last 1 or 2 flowers, before this very last little flower at the very edge of the stem dies, just count back 1, 2, 3 flowers and break the stem there. And that'll send out another stem from the same branching from the main stem. And oftentimes when you go into flower shops, you see these Phalaenopsis, and they'll have 2 and 3 and 4 spikes coming up.
Okay.
And that's how people do it. They've cut down, they've blinded the end of the stem, and then the new branches have indeed come out.
So if you let it go all the way until the last blossom falls off, it's going to be problematic whether it's going to blossom again.
Exactly. At that point, the stem usually turns brown, and then you just end up cutting off the stem.
But if you go back, you said
as long as there's some life left in the flowers, just count back from the very end. 1, 2, 3 flowers, give it a little snip. I'll do it right now. Leave a little snip like this. I went 2 flowers. I'll go 1 more. And what's going to happen here, you wear these in your lapel later on when you go out this evening.
I like that.
We'll keep you busy tonight in the social areas. And then what'll happen here is right about here, you'll see a new branch coming in form before these will die.
Fantastic.
And so that's how they do it.
Now, does that work with virtually all orchids?
No, we're just talking about Phalaenopsis here. Just with Phalaenopsis. And with Phalaenopsis, there's a lot of tricks you can do. Like, for example, if you have some that have never bloomed back, they're at your house every day, probably in your bathroom or your living room, looking ugly because there's no flowers, not just have these ugly leaves sitting here, and no one really understands decorating-wise what's going on. It's ugly, it's ugly. Well, listen, just take that plant, and if you live like in the Bay Area, you can either throw it outside on a cooler evening overnight, just for one night, or you can even throw it in the little salad bin in your refrigerator overnight. And sometimes that little cold snap
it'll trigger.
Exactly. And then about a week later, you'll see a new stem coming up.
So if I go into a flower store or go to a place, because you see them all kinds of places, you'll see them even at the flower section of places like Safeways or whatever.
Absolutely. Trader
Will
Joe's.
it say Phalaenopsis on it? How would I know that that's what I'm getting?
Well, these, you'll have to learn one orchid this afternoon. Because there's no way we can get you, if you can just come out here with learning one name, they all look alike. It's like this one here. They all have these same little leaves that come down, and they're flat, and they also have these little white, yellow, or red flowers, like this one up there on the top. So the little leaves of that. That's pretty much the standard of America.
Okay.
These are produced by the millions and millions in Taiwan. Is one of the chief places that produces them, and that we import them here. And this is all pretty new technology. 30 years ago, this common Phalaenopsis, which you can buy at Trader Joe's today, would have been like $75 at Trader Joe's if you could find it.
Wow.
And at that point, this dendrobium was actually a more common orchid 30 years ago.
Interesting.
This is the one they started producing in Hawaii and also in Malaysia.
Now, I want to touch on something, because you mentioned Taiwan and you mentioned Hawaii, and you kind of, I don't know, for some reason, when you think of orchids, you kind of think tropical.
Yes, you do.
But that's not accurate, is it?
Not at all. We have orchids right here in California. We have orchids right here in this valley we're in.
That are native to this.
Exactly. There's a lovely little one called Calypso balbosa that grows underneath all the redwood trees. So in Michigan, the redwood trees, Muir Woods, the Santa Cruz Mountains. It's a little lady slipper. It's much like this lady slipper here.
The lady slipper is an orchid?
Yes, this is lady slipper as well. Only the Calypso balbosa, our native orchid, is this, but it's only this tall.
Oh,
it's like a miniature one of these, and they hide underneath and great history with medicinal use by the local native peoples as well.
Well, my family and I, my wife and kids and I, lived in New Hampshire for a number of years.
It's nice there.
And these we'd see out in the back on our 12 acres, these lady slippers, they would pop up, and they would. And for whatever reason, I never considered them, and I never knew they were an orchid.
They're one of America's best known and best loved orchids. Actually, with these lady slippers, they all call them lady slipper orchids. When they occur in Asia, they're called Paphiopedilum. When they occur in South America, they're called Phragmopedilum. When they occur in America, Cypripedium. And so, but subsequently, they're all just basic lady slipper orchids. They all have the same little pouch that they have.
How cool is that?
And actually, it's very difficult to grow our native orchids in cultivation. The only place you can do that is basically back east, where they're growing in the ground already. If you take those orchids from back east and bring them to a greenhouse, it's very hard to duplicate good culture in a greenhouse for our native California or our native American orchids, the ones from back east, for example.
So if I'm, here I am, Dave, and I'd say, oh, this is beautiful. This orchid is gorgeous, or that orchid is beautiful. I want to try some of these, or grow some of these, or at least have some of these in my house and stuff like that. You brought these samples, but you're a specialist.
Yes.
You know this stuff.
Yes, we do that.
This one that you mentioned, I kind of get how we can keep that one going. But what do you do for some of these other beautiful things?
We got to give you an easy one, Dave. We got to get you some easy ones.
I need something easy.
Otherwise, you're never going to buy them anymore if they start blooming back. If you look right in front of you, this taller gold one right here, that's called a Cymbidium. That is one of the most common orchids we have in North America. A big history in this.
And this is a North American orchid.
It's
native to North America.
No, it's not. It's native to Asia. Native to Asia. But it'll grow outside in North America.
Okay.
Because it's from regions in Asia that are similar in climate to our climate.
Which is what I was interested in, because you mentioned that this one, the lady slipper, if you take it out of its normal environment, it has a challenge growing elsewhere. And but
Cymbidiums, they grow right outside in Santa Clara.
They're very hardy.
Very, very hardy.
Okay.
And they not only do they grow outside here, but they thrive out here. And there's a huge history. We used to have a firm called Rod McClellan's.
Yes.
And for a while it was a big deal. Every Mother's Day there were literally hundreds of thousands of Cymbidiums. I worked there, so I know that they would produce for Mother's Day and stuff. A big deal. Now what's happened with these Cymbidiums, you might have noticed that nowadays they've gotten shorter, and the flowers have gotten a little smaller to make them easier to ship.
Oh, so that was a planned...
Exactly, a planned attack to reduce the size of these Cymbidium orchids, because before the plant would be twice its size, and shipping was a nightmare.
Yeah.
So subsequently, one of our
engineering,
local...
so to speak.
Yeah, mostly breeding, just straight breeding. And as a result, they reduced that to a smaller size. And that one does very, very well outside.
Also multicolors?
All colors, from whites to pinks, and also the best when you're shopping for orchids, Dave. Next time you go shopping, and even if you're Best Buy, whatever, I want you to incorporate your nose. Because the first thing that falls down genetically with orchids is scent. And with scent, you have the whole shebang.
Yeah.
You get the flower, you get the scent, but the first thing that falls genetically is scent. But if you look at that Cymbidium there, it might have a slight fragrance in the morning. But if you go out Cymbidium hunting, when you go out to your store, look at Cymbidiums, I want you to go around there and sniff each one of them. Because there's some, because now people are starting to breed for fragrance again. The breeders realize, oh, this is a lost opportunity here. Everybody loves the whole package, everybody loves fragrance. So incorporating breeding back into the Cymbidiums.
Interesting.
And I breed an orchid myself. I breed an orchid called Cymbidium, and we actually breed just for fragrances with that plant. We have a specific lemon lime scent or something.
Oh, how cool.
We don't care much what the flower looks like. We're going for that scent.
Nice.
Because it kind of makes the whole package. Because that's one thing that's been lost over the years is
well, yeah, I noticed. So we're sitting here amongst these, and you know, if there were a bunch of roses or something here,
you can smell it. Yeah. Very few are fragrant here. This is one that might be a little fragrant right now. This is a little miniature angraecoid from Africa. You see how that's because it's pollinated by a moth. This is like Darwin's orchid. It's like a miniature replication of Darwin's orchid. You see the nectary here? So the moth that pollinates this has a tongue long enough to get to the nectar at the very bottom of this nectary.
Oh,
if you hold it up to the light, you'll see there's a little bit of fluid in the very end of it. And that's what the moth is going after. And that's what Darwin said when he found a flower just like this, but the nectary was 14 inches long.
Wow.
And then 10 years after he died, isn't that just like life? They found the moth. He must have been mad about that. He said, I told you guys that moth was here.
It had to be there somewhere.
It had to be there someplace. And this is like a little warm growing orchid. Now, when you're having growing orchids in your home, you you see there's large ones and there's small ones, medium-sized ones. This is one of the ones that stays a small orchid, and it stays warm and it grows warm. This could be grown in the house with your Phalaenopsis.
So having it indoors or outdoors, depending upon the...
Exactly. Okay. That's the best thing. So whenever you buy an orchid, whenever your viewing public buys an orchid, they should always ask, what's the name of this orchid, and is it warm growing or cool growing? And you'll get some feedback with that.
Got it. I want to talk about this plant in the back, this one right here in a moment. But as you're grabbing that, I want the folks to know that what they can do, if they have any questions about anything we're talking about, orchids or how-tos or recognizing things, send us a query. You can send us an email at info@referencepointtv.com. I'll get it to Bruce. He'll answer your questions, and we'll get that taken care of. So what we have here is what? The
famous vanilla orchid.
The vanilla orchid.
This is the vanilla orchid. If you were a tree...
This is what vanilla beans come from?
This is what vanilla beans come from. What happens is, if you imagine, we have to imagine this. Pretend this is like an all-white flower. It's about this size, too. So I'm going to just crumple this down to make it look like a little teeny all-white flower. What you'll see, this produces one flower right at the axis of the leaf node.
Right.
And this one flower is pollinated by hand. Then it forms a seed pod. Yes.
Okay.
And the seed pod is like a long bean.
Yes.
And that is your vanilla bean. And that is where vanilla comes from.
How interesting.
And this is probably the most, people used to think this was the only orchid people use for food and what have you. But the reality is, people have been eating orchids all around the world forever.
Wow.
That's one of these misconceptions that we have, is that only this orchid is used for food. But in reality, there's a whole bunch of terrestrial orchids that come, like, for example, in Africa is having a huge problem right now because they make a meatless bologna out of orchids in Africa. And it's gotten so popular in Zimbabwe, it's completely extinct. And so now they are smuggling tons of these orchids across the borders
other countries.
Just to keep up with this.
Could they cultivate them if they wanted to?
It's very difficult because they're native orchids, just like we had talked about. The most difficult kinds of orchids to cultivate.
Nice.
And so subsequently, they're like, there's the whole thing with the orchids. They've called me to ask for what do I suggest, because in their native habitat, they're now extinct or approaching extinction.
Interesting.
So
okay, could you lift that up for just a moment?
Sure,
I want to point something out and ask you about this, because it looks like, are these roots?
These are roots. Now, David, you got to pretend like you're a tree. You're a tree.
All right, I'm a tree.
Okay, you're a tree.
I'm a tree.
Now, what this root will do, like for example, this little root here, let's bring you down right here. You're a little tree and you have a little branch right here. This root here will wrap around your finger. Maybe the camera can see this, maybe the camera can't see this.
Yeah.
And it attaches itself to the tree. And so it grows flush right on the tree. And they grow them in the shady tree. Sometimes they grow them under coffee.
Okay.
There's a whole Mexican lore about the cacao tree and then also the vanilla growing together. There's actually a myth that the vanilla was one Mayan princess and the cacao was a Mayan prince. And they goofed around. They had a lot of fun in orchid paradise, and they were too naughty. They were too naughty, and they were changed into plants.
But not all orchids have this root-like thing?
No, this is probably one of the very few that actually even grows like a vine.
Ah.
But there's so many different kinds of orchid, David. That's what's going to be so exciting for you when you go to the orchid show. You'll see all these kinds.
Let's talk about that. Tell us about the show coming up.
Oh, it's exciting. It's very, historically, it's one of the most important shows in America. We have a huge contingent of orchid growers here in California, very, very well known. And we're able to do more with orchids in California than, let's say, they do in Florida.
Why is that?
Because of our climate.
Because of our climate.
See, we can grow warm things in our warm greenhouse, and orchids that are cool growing, that actually need to be.
And I'll set that up over here so you got hands free.
Get this guy over here. Watch out, just attach right to your leg.
There we go.
Actually,
what
they do in homes, I've seen them attach. People grow them on their kitchen windows and on their eaves, and the roots attach so solidly to the wood that when they peel off, it peels off all their paint.
I've seen that. So
it's very easy to do. So
anyway, so you were saying
cool growing orchids, and there's, for example, on this table here, I mentioned this little small one is a worm growing orchid, but here, for example, just to show you how odd and different these are, this grows right outside.
These are.
Isn't this a crazy, tiny little flower? But look what's even more exciting, Dave. Maybe we can show the camera this. Is if you look out where the stem comes out of the leaf. It comes out of the middle of the leaf. How odd is that?
I've never seen something like that before.
You've probably never seen any plant do that before.
No, I've never seen that
This is one of the only plants I know that even does that. I don't know why it does that. It's a good place to look at it here as well. Very, very unusual growth. Very, very unusual growth. And for example, this grows in Colombia, in the high mountains, the high Sierras in Colombia. And it can grow right outside here in San Francisco and in this area here.
Let's talk a little bit about San Francisco Bay Area because that's where we live, and there are so many little microclimates here.
Yes.
Here, San Francisco, you come further south, it gets warmer. You go on the East Bay, you live across in Contra Costa County or whatever. What might people want to think about in terms of the kind of orchid they might be interested in based on where they live in the Bay Area?
Well, if you mentioned before, if you have any kind of yard space at all, then you want to, of course, go right to the orchids that can grow outside.
Right, okay.
But so we talk about the Cymbidiums, and right to the left is this little Masdevallia, this little orange orchid right here. That grows outside so easily. You just throw them in the backyard, even down here in Santa Clara. In San Francisco, it's not a problem at all, but instead they do well in Santa Clara too. But that's about, and then this little Pleurothallus we looked at, and also this, for example, talk about miniature orchids. Look at this little miniature orchid here.
Oh, wow.
This is another little, this one comes from Ecuador.
That is so tiny.
And look at the little teeny little flower. There are tens and tens of thousands of kinds of orchid species.
Oh, wow.
They're finding them still every day. We find orchid species every day. And it's kind of tragic because, from an environmental standpoint, of course, because as we go ahead and we level the rainforest, we are losing things that we don't even know about yet.
Let's talk about something. You mentioned something to me earlier about medicinal qualities of certain orchids.
Yes.
How does that, let's talk about that a little bit more.
That's very exciting and very important. Here's a good example. This vanilla orchid we just finished talking about just a minute ago, this vanilla vine that's right here. This is kind of interesting. Now, how long have they been looking at vanilla? Since Cortez was here, right?
Right.
So for hundreds of years, scientists have taken it. We have artificial vanilla flavoring.
Right.
We have artificial, just everything you can imagine. But they just have discovered in the last couple of years that vanilla can block quorum sensing, which is the swarm intelligence which tells bacteria when your body is weak enough to invade.
Ah.
You see. But no one knew all those years of studying vanilla, and we're just now finding that out.
Wow.
So can you imagine the knowledge we've just missed?
Yeah.
The knowledge we have just missed. And in terms of when I was a young hippie and I was growing these orchids, right? This is way back in the 60s.
Right.
People would say, oh, Bruce, isn't there an orchid that gets you high? Can't you smoke one of these orchids, Isn't there something you can do? And I said, well, no, there really isn't an orchid that gets you high. And there really wasn't. But I was just undereducated because about 15 years ago, a friend of mine who does social and social anthropology was down in Mexico. And there is indeed a type of rat tail oncidium, which we don't have here tonight, that is hallucinogenic, is a strong hallucinogenic, and is used in there. But because all that's been lost, but pretty much all that pre-Columbian knowledge has been lost to us. We just don't know that anymore what's going on. So it's very, very interesting.
We're moving through stuff here. This has been fascinating. I want to talk a little bit about the book that's on the table there and this fantastic print that you have here too. So let's touch on the book a little bit. This is your book,
This
correct?
is my book. I have to admit, this is my book. The Orchid Whisperer, I told you the little story about it being named. I thought they were calling me up to do a book on Sobralia breeding, but no, they decided that wouldn't sell any books. And I've been on TV a lot, and you TV guys have been very nice and called me the Orchid Whisperer since the moniker came out. And my wife kicked me so hard, she says, you just let them call you whatever they want and bring home a check.
As long as they print the book.
And then the book, I worked with Chronicle on this book, and Chronicle was wonderful. The Chronicle, we're in the 7th printing. It's the best-selling orchid book in the world, as far as I'm certainly the best-selling orchid book in the world over last Christmas. And it's currently sold out. But as soon as we get some copies, we're going to get you a nice copy for your wife.
And in this book, you do what? What do you talk about? Well,
that's just it's a general beginner's book, and it's just talking about that. I take the different groups, much like we're doing here tonight, David. I talk about the different groups, where they grow, how should you grow them. But it's meant for the whole country, so it has to be kind of general. It's kind of a general thing, but then there's a lot of new things happening that people don't know about, and I'm going to talk about one of those right now, too. I'm going to take this orchid right here. You hold that orchid. I'm going to pull this right off the thing because I want to see this. This is called a Phalaenopsis. And this is kind of interesting. You see how this is growing, not in bark, but it's growing in this moss.
Oh, yes.
Okay, now most of the Phalaenopsis growing today, if you look at the other, this type, except for this one, but that one is, they grow in this moss. At the big box stores, the Trader Joe's, it's growing in this moss. Now, this moss, you have to be careful of in terms of watering, because you actually have to water by weight.
By weight?
Because it's watered now, and you feel how it's heavy?
Yeah.
Now, what makes this sphagnum moss different is because it's sphagnum moss, instead of drying from the top down, like everything in the world dries. Everything dries from the top down. This sphagnum moss dries from the bottom up because the capillary action of the moss.
Oh, interesting.
And so when you buy this orchid and you get it home, the best thing to do is to bring it to your sink and water it once. And that weight should determine that it has been watered. Because if you rely on looking at the top of the pot and saying, it's still wet on top, well, that might be true, but the whole bottom might be bone dry.
That doesn't mean this can do anything down there.
Exactly. You really want to water by weight.
And what about this print?
Oh, this is a lovely print. We are lucky here. I haven't been lucky. I work for this. This is by our famous Senator Dianne Feinstein. One of the things we have at our orchid show is we have a very nice silent auction.
Okay, and tell me again, the orchid show is when?
It is the 28th. You have it written down, David?
Yeah.
David knows. He'll tell us the dates in a second.
February 26th through 28th in San Francisco at Fort Mason.
Yes. And that's every day, all day long. And this as you walk in, you'll see a little table where there's some very interesting things being offered. There's things like this painting. This is Dianne Feinstein. She paints. She paints these, and she has a print made, and then she hand signs it. I'm there, but she actually hand signs it, and hand labels the print. And these are very hard to find. These are kind of a neat thing to have from our dear Senator Feinstein. And just to let you know, I've seen these go anywhere from thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to hundreds of dollars. And the Orchid Show is one of the few places you can actually find it for just a few $100s rather than thousands.
Now, is the Orchid Show an annual event?
It is. Every year, we've had tons of them under our belt by now. And this is probably at Fort Mason, and it's a very large venue. And it's ideal for us because we can get a lot of people in there, selling orchids. According
to the flyer, which I think we have an image of that we can put on the screen here, wonderful. The show is from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. on Friday and Saturday, and from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Sunday. And it's sponsored by the, San Francisco Orchid Society, which is a nonprofit organization.
Yes, that's the society I belong to. It's very strong. We're very lucky. It's the oldest society in San Francisco. It's a very fine society. And you guys have great societies down here on the peninsula as well. As a matter of fact, there's no place you can go in America that doesn't have a little orchid society somewhere.
There. Yeah.
There's a few people there growing orchids, and it's a great hobby. Well, and you should think about that hobby.
What's been real interesting for me, we only have a few minutes left here, but what's been real interesting for me is getting a sense of that it is not as difficult as one might think to actually get your orchids to continue to blossom. I mean, this whole thing about what you just cutting it back, etc., was great. The outdoor orchids, I think that's fabulous. Yes. Now, ones like this you could plant, or you could have them in a pot like this, because some people, there's a lot of high-density housing here in the Bay Area. So you might have a patio or something, and maybe a flower bed, but you could grow.
Oh, absolutely. You plant these in a fine bark mixture, and you can have the whole, I've seen hedges, there's hedges of these in Santa Clara.
Nice.
You walk down driveways, they grow them on on trees even. They really, and actually on tree ferns will grow a lot of orchids. This, for example, this little, which I can give to you as a little gift, Dave. This is a little Dendrobium kingianum from Australia. It's from Australia. Just like a eucalyptus tree. Ah. It can grow outside here just like our eucalyptus can. And this you can actually put into a tree fern. You know those little holes in the tree fern?
Yeah.
Just stick this little baby right in one of those little holes. And it'll grow right in there.
It'll grow in there.
The whole thing will completely take over the tree fern. And one thing I got to speak up too, is they wanted me to say about this wonderful orchid show is on Saturday. We're doing something new this year. We're having a young person stay on Saturday, half price if you're under 30 on Saturday. There'll be a great rock and roll band called the Rightsiders playing there.
Oh, okay.
And it should be just a lot of fun for everybody. Because it is a young hobby. Because when you travel, you can go out there and find them. If you go to Mexico, you can find them wherever you go. And it's a wonderful hobby to have. And most men the hobby's pretty much split between men and women. I work for as many men as I do for women, which is kind of interesting. It's not a totally sexist kind of thing.
But it's kind of neat, too, to think about that, because if you are traveling, whether you're going to South America or whether you're going to Europe or you're going to Asia and you're going to go out and you want to do some hiking or whatever, you have the opportunity and you can really discover phenomenal beauty, which I think is absolutely fabulous.
Yes, you really can. And when it gets you out there, you're seeing everything. You're seeing the orchids, but then you're also seeing the birds and the bees and the butterflies, and all that comes with it, all that Mother Nature gives us.
Exactly.
We're very lucky.
Well, Bruce, this has been fantastic. I want to remind the folks, if you have any questions about what we've talked about here, about orchids, about the book, about the show coming up at the end of February, send us a query at info@referencepointtv.com and we'll get it to the right party. Bruce, this has been fantastic. I greatly appreciate that you came, not just yourself being here, but bringing so many fantastic and beautiful examples of the sort of orchids that we here in the Bay Area actually could grow. And I think this is fabulous. So.
And I expect a lot out of you, Dave. I expect next year when I come to visit, I expect you to make a brick bloom. You gotta make a brick bloom.
Make a brick bloom.
Yeah, this is actually one of my clients would brag to people that I can make a brick bloom. So I thought I better make a brick bloom.
There you go. That's pretty cool.
You can mount this orchid right on there.
It sticks right on the brick.
It sticks right on the brick. In nature, these will grow on rock as well. But it's interesting, and I'm sure you'll do just as well by this time next year, David.
Sounds good. So, Bruce, thank you very much. Appreciate you being here. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you next time on Reference Point.